Hey guys, it's Di, and I have a highly requested video today. This video has actually been requested for a number of years, and I'm just now getting around to feeling like I wanted to do a video on it. For a number of years, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to add to the subject, and also as a former authenticator, you're kind of told at times to really keep this information to yourself for the fear that you don't want fakes to get better. But I felt like, especially after doing my beginner's guide to Louis Vuitton and beginner's guide to Balenciaga, that it would be a nice kind of part of that series to help people, especially if you're new to the brand, just starting to think about purchasing items for your collection, how to authenticate your items and those key things that you should look for to authenticate your items. Now, I am a former authenticator. I've been out of it for a number of years, and before you all start sending me emails, I'm extremely busy right now. My main function, I really consider myself to be mommy first, and this is something I do for fun on the side. I get a lot of emails even before posting this video up of people, asking for my opinion and that sort of thing. I'm always happy to help when I can, but I do not have a quick turnaround time as far as getting back to people. It's sometimes up to 2 weeks. So please don't expect a quick response, and really I'm not open to authentication at this time just because I can't handle like a huge influx of emails and that sort of thing. I will definitely try to help if I get a message from you, but it will not probably be quickly returned. So hopefully that makes sense, but I did want to just do a general overview of some general things that you can look at if you're new to the brand and are thinking about buying a pre-owned item, some things that will get you started on figuring out what is real versus fake in the pre-owned market. And I would also say I would highly recommend having any bag or accessory that you're looking at authenticated, of course, by either a professional authentication service that give their opinions for a fee, or there's a number of authentication services, forums, and that sort of thing out there that do it for free as just kind of a general service. And always when buying a pre-owned item, I would say get as many opinions as possible. I think that's absolutely pertinent because no matter whether it is a paid service or someone doing it for free, it's always just someone's opinion. And as authenticators, you can look at a lot of different bags online, and you get a lot of information, but at the end of the day, it's still just someone's opinion. So I would say get as many opinions as possible, especially if you're spending a large amount of money, because obviously you want to be getting the real deal. And I will go into a different video why I'm so adamant about authentic bags and not buying fake bags. So I'll get into that whole thing in a different video because I want to just keep this based around authentication. So the brand I'm going to do today is Louis Vuitton, and I wanted to show you some basic things that authenticators would look for right off the bat. Some of these seem pretty basic, but I want to just touch on these in case you're new to the brand and wanting to know what to look for. The main first thing that you want to look for, especially for monogram items, and everything I'm going to be talking about today is for pretty much items from the past few decades, nothing vintage, nothing French company. All of my authentication experience is pretty much with newer items, so things from the past few decades. I have a video on date codes, which I'll link down below, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But the first thing that you want to look for is the Louis Vuitton logo will never be cut off. So you're never going to find a Louis Vuitton logo, especially on monogram and things like that, here to the seam. There are some exceptions in the vintage market, and there is one notable exception for some other lines, some other prints, and the smaller accessories where it's just statistically not possible with some of the multicolor items for them not to be cut off. But for monogram, generally, the logos are large enough that they will never be cut off. You'll never see a logo cut off here at the seam. So that's the first thing to look for. They don't necessarily have to be perfectly centered. You can see that this little pochette that I just got at the store a few weeks ago, it's not necessarily perfectly centered, but the logos will never be cut off. And that was the next point that I was going to talk about, was to remember that the canvas part, the portion of the stitching, is done by humans. So you have to allow for a little bit of human error. When you go into the store and you line up two Speedies next to each other, they may have been done by two different craftsmen, so the craftsmanship may look slightly different. And some of the curves may be slightly different, from the one to the next, and we're talking millimeters of difference. Alignments on the bottoms of damier bags may not be exactly to the millimeter spec of being lined up, but in general you will never have a totally off skew alignment with the pattern. And also these Louis Vuitton logos, like you can see here on the monogram, will not be cut off at the seam. Another thing that you want to look for if it's a used item, an older item, this vachetta leather, and I go through all this terminology in my beginner's guide to Louis Vuitton, which I'll link down below. So if you want to watch that first to get some of the terminology, it might be helpful. But on the monogram bags, the Azur Damier bags, it has this vachetta leather, and this is going to get darker over time. Use due to sun and just general exposure also. So it just naturally gets darker over time and can develop a dark tan color. I touch a little bit on date codes in a totally separate video, so I'm going to link that down below. But generally modern date codes are going to have 2 alpha and 4 numeric codes. And I go into details over what this means, but it basically specifically says where the bag was made, the country code, and then also has a date code for either the month and year that it was made for older bags or the week and year that it was made for slightly newer bags within the past decade or so. So I'm going to leave the date code video to its own, but generally say that all Louis Vuitton accessories and handbags will have a date code on them. And for instance, like this monogram pochette, it has a date code here, and it's on a little piece of vachetta leather down here on the interior. And so you can see down here on the inside a 2 alpha and 4 numeric code right there, and that is explained more in detail in the date code video, which I will link around here somewhere. Alright, on to my next point for authentication, and I'm going to consider this the most important part of this authentication video for Louis Vuitton. The stitching and cutting of the fabric is all done by human. There's human error there, ever so slight. They're craftsmen, so it's a very slight statistical error, but it's going to be there. The stamping on the hardware and on the sides of the bags and the date codes and that sort of thing are done by machines. So you can have machine error for the imprints not being as deep as maybe from one bag to the other. Vernis is a good example of this, where some vernis can be deeply embossed. Other vernis items can be very, very shallow, like this item has very, very shallow imprinting. And that just has to do with machine, how much it presses in and that sort of thing. But the thing about machines is that it will always be the same shape, no matter how deeply the item was imprinted. And so that goes for every single piece of metal, or like with the leather on the vernis, how much it's imprinted. So in general, items from Louis Vuitton, even the smallest piece of hardware, generally has a little imprint on it that says either LV, it has the full Louis Vuitton spelled out, and these are some of the greatest pieces on the bag to authenticate it. I actually had someone send me a video about a week or two ago asking me to help authenticate an item that she received from like a thrift place. She didn't really think that it was real, but she thought it would be nice to check, and maybe she found a nice surprise. Again, another rule, if it's too good to be true, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. But the stamping on hardware, you can get a couple seconds into looking at the video or looking at the pictures, and the stamping is the dead giveaway on a lot of items, because stamping is something that is done by a machine and very, very hard to duplicate. So what I mean by this stamping is right here on this little zipper pull, it says Louis Vuitton right down here in a circle there. So there's that stamped item here on this bag. There's also a stamping here in the back. See that back there? So that's a multicolor item. These monogram items have the stamping down at the edge, and then they also have the date code on the interior. So the first thing you want to look at is font. And the best way that I can show you the font is to hold up a dust bag and to show you some of the main indicators that you're going to look for. Generally when items are stamped, they're going to have the same spacing, but they're also going to have the same font. And one of the telltale signs that you want to look for is how this Louis Vuitton is written out. So here you want to look at the font that's on this dust bag, and the font generally on most stamped items is going to have this same font unless space doesn't allow it. So I wanted to just point out the shape of the O's in Louis Vuitton, the U, and then also pay attention to what this UITT looks like. So I'm going to try to get some close-ups here and show you on some different items. But these zipper pulls that have it written in a circle, you can see that the zipper has it in a nice, the O is a nice circle, and then the spacing is nice and even between the different imprints. It's a nice even imprint. Multicolor zipper, just to compare the two, you can see that the fonts are the same between the two, that the markers of the O's are the same, and the UITT has the same spacing. For stamping, like these leather areas here at the end, you again want to look at the O's. The O's are usually on bad fakes, are usually one of the dead giveaways. The O's are one of the areas where the most mistakes are made, but you want to look at the O's, look at the U's, and see how they're shaped, and then also look at the overall font in the bag, and then especially look at the UITT and see the spacing between those and make sure that the font matches the full word. Then when you go down to the Made in France area, Made in is always going to be lowercase, and then the uppercase part is the country. So France is capitalized, Spain would be capitalized, the USA would be capitalized, and so on. You can see that these have a different type of stamping here on the zipper. So a lot of accessories are going to have this kind of stamped where it's just the LV on the stamp, and they're going to be raised and very clear around the edges. There's also on these little D-rings, there is an LV right here that's stamped in, and again you're looking at the font in all these and matching the font. So I realize that's somewhat abstract, but if you look at enough pictures, looking at those fine details and comparing the fonts, actually getting that imprint for the font in your mind is actually one of the best ways to have an idea of what to look for when you're authenticating. Another thing you're going to be looking at is stitching, and stitching is important because even though there is some statistical room for error if it's done by a human, it's still going to be nice and even and had to have passed quality control specifications. So the stitching on both of these is nice and tight. You can see that there's no snags or pulls, and then also you can tell that the piping is nicely pulled in and on the bottom as well. There's a lot of different things just on the different styles that it would be a lot more in-depth video. I couldn't even go over it in one video of knowing what to look for seams, no seams, specific stitches here and there. But I'm just going to try to keep it in general terms to keep this video as short as possible. One thing to look at with wallets, and I unfortunately don't have a zippy coin purse wallet here to show you today, but on these seams where there are two pieces of leather being sewn together, there's actually a seam that pulls over the side of the leather and goes up and connects the whole thing through. This is something that's actually overlooked quite a bit, and I believe on, again, bad fakes is something that is missing, but on zippy coin purse wallets, when you open it up, there's going to be a stitch that follows around the whole side, and that's what honestly keeps the bag really nice and tight and keeps it nice and usable even after you open it and zip it and use that leather a lot. It's what keeps it nice and intact. Another example of that stitching is here on this Sarah wallet, and you can see that this stitching that goes up the side, it goes all the way up the side, and then it continues over the spot where the card slot leather stops and continues up, and that's what I'm talking about where it connects the leather. That's a really nitpicky authentication thing, but it's something that it's just kind of an important thing to look for, and also something that I don't believe some fake people would really necessarily even realize. So going on to snaps and closures, you can see that again all these snaps and closures have the imprints. Like on this Sarah wallet it says Louis Vuitton and it's in the circle. Again, you want to be matching the font up to what I showed you on the dust bag. So making sure the O's are perfectly round, that the U's have a rounded bottom, and then looking at the spacing between the UITT and making sure that that spacing is all correct. This zipper on the interior of the Sarah is another zipper that has that LV imprint, which is always going to have the same shape to it. And a lot of these brass items, they all should be, you know, a subtle gold tone item. So this is another example of the made in. You're going to have your Louis Vuitton made in France right here. Look where your R for registered trademark is, because if you look here on the Sarah wallet versus these two monogram items, you can see that the registered trademark symbol is always in the same place. So these are just really, really basic starts to authentication. Let me know what questions you guys have. I also have an authentication guide for Balenciaga coming up. Just the basic overview of items you can start looking for to help yourself authenticate items before you maybe send them on to Authenticator, and possibly save them some time, save you some time if you can look at things and know automatically that they are not real. So let me know what questions you guys have down below. I will try to answer them as quickly as possible, and thanks for watching. Have a great day.